10. Precipitations and UFOs. Captain Mackay in his Flying Saucer Review article referred to precipitations, angel hair, jelly, oily fluids, etc., which evaporate and disappear. Viscous precipitations and the feeling of hairs being drawn across the face are met with during the production of seance room materialization phenomena. It is undoubtedly correct that people participating in seances often get a feeling of stickiness, and of something oily, although no oil can actually be seen. There are many instances of oily substances being discovered in areas where a UFO has been seen, close at hand, or even landed. On November 5, 1955, Reinhold Schmidt, a grain buyer from Bakersfield, California, was driving his car near Kearney, Nebraska. Suddenly, his engine petered out. Nearby was a strange 100-foot-long object on the ground. He was allowed by the occupants to enter the craft. However, we are not concerned here with giving a long account of this interesting contact story, but in reporting that a patch of oily substance was found at the spot. This was not oil as we know it. Ectoplasm is a very common feature in the seance room. This is the substance of which materializations are formed, and which appears prior to a materialization. It can be likened to a liquid plasticine, and flows over things in the room, and can elongate itself to great lengths. It is rather like whitish bubblegum. Now, a substance very common in UFO sightings is known as angel hair, rather appropriately. It has often been observed to drop from UFOs and drape itself around telegraph wires, hedges, and over the countryside. Amy Michel, in his first book, The Truth About Flying Saucers, described the now classic sightings at Oloron and Gaillac, in France, which took place 10 days apart. I think it is essential to include them here because they are perfect examples as far as angel hair goes. To my way of thinking, these two sightings are in a sense really one, as you will see, and there is something quite uncanny about them, which is positively fascinating. The first sighting took place on Friday, October 17, 1952, at Oloron. It was an absolutely perfect day with a clear blue sky. The fantastic event was witnessed by M. Yves Prejean, the head of the Oloron High School, his wife, and their 3 children. This is M. Prejean's account of what he and his family saw, taken from Michel's book. In the north, a cottony cloud of strange shape was floating against the blue sky. Above it, a long narrow cylinder, apparently inclined at a 45-degree angle, was slowly moving in a straight line toward the southwest. I estimated its altitude as 2 or 3 kilometers. The object was whitish, non-luminous, and very distinctly defined. A soil of plume of white smoke was escaping from its upper end. At some distance in front of the cylinder, about 30 other objects were following the same trajectory. To the naked eye, they appeared as featureless balls resembling puffs of smoke. But, with the help of opera glasses, it was possible to make out a central red sphere, surrounded by a sort of yellowish ring inclined at an angle. The angle, 5 according to M. Prejean, was such as to conceal almost entirely the lower part of the central sphere, while revealing its upper surface 5. These saucers moved in pairs, following a broken path, characterized in general by rapid and short zigzags. When 2 saucers drew away from one another, a whitish streak, like an electric arc, was produced between them. All these strange objects left an abundant trail behind them, which slowly fell to the ground as it dispersed. For several hours, clumps of it hung in the trees, on the telephone wires, and on the roofs of the houses. Michel goes on to state that various people were able to collect some of this gossamer-like substance, which rapidly became gelatinous, sublimed in the air, and disappeared. 10 days later, on October 27, the whole scene was reenacted again over Gaillac. The same actors, the same play? The long plumed cylinder, inclined 45 degrees in the midst of a procession of saucers flying, in pairs zigzag fashion, and dispersing as at Oloron, large quantities of angel hair. At Gaillac there were about 100 witnesses, including 2 police officers. We will be referring to these 2 sightings again later regarding another possible connection with the paranormal. The late Professor Charles Maney, former head of the Department of Physics at the Defiance College, Defiance, Ohio, wrote an article some years ago for Flying Saucer Review, entitled The Phenomena of Angel Hair, in which he documented angel hair cases all over the world, notably in Europe, USA, Australia and New Zealand. Since then, there have been numerous other cases. Now it is possible that angel hair and maybe other oily substances could be superfluous materialized energy left over from the materialization of a UFO from another dimension or space-time continuum. Further, that this superfluous material not used drops to Earth and gradually dissolves back into its own dimension. This, of course, I cannot prove and is only theoretical speculation. However, you may like to ponder on this idea. If this thought has some interest, it could be compared with ectoplasm to some extent. This, we have seen, is a substance which appears in the seance room and from which materializations manifest. We are not saying that angel hair and ectoplasm are necessarily the same. However, they may be four cousins. Angel hair may be a byproduct of something more closely connected with ectoplasm. Anyway, these ideas may open up a train of thought for ufologists and another field of research. 11. Expansion and contraction of UFOs. UFOs have appeared as localized points of light, and then grown into large quasi-solid objects, only to shrink to pinpoints of light again and disappear. In seance rooms, materialization phenomena, ectoplasmic faces or hands have been observed as being quite tiny, and then to have grown to much larger proportions, and later to shrink away, rather like the blowing up of a balloon with a face painted on it, and then letting the air out. Captain Ivar Mackay, UFOs and the Occult, Flying Saucer Review. Gordon Creighton devotes a chapter in the Humanoids to the Villa Santina case, the central figure of which was Professor Rapuzzi Luigi Johannes, a well-known Italian painter and writer. During the first part of August, 1947, Professor Johannes was in a small village called Revio, near Villa Santina, in Carnia, Friuli, in the extreme northeast of Italy. He regularly visited there each summer searching for fossils, as geology was one of his favorite sciences. On August 14, he set off early one morning with a small knapsack and his geologist's pick, and was following a path along the left bank of a stream. He passed through some fir trees, and then noticed a large, red lenticular object. The professor is short-sighted, so he put on his glasses and noticed it was a disc about 10 meters wide, and at about 6 meters above the stream. He then saw what at first seemed to be two boys. He shouted to them, pointing to the disc, and walked towards them. Then he stopped petrified. The two boys were dwarfs, the likes of which I had never seen or imagined, stated the professor. They were no more than 90 centimeters in height, and wearing what appeared to be dark blue overalls made of some material the professor could not describe. Translucent is the only word for it, he said. He gazed at them in astonishment for what seemed a long time. Then, unfortunately, he raised his arm with the pick and waved it in their direction, shouting out to ask if he could be of any help to them. The beings must have thought he was threatening them, for one raised his right hand to his belt and from it came something like a ray which felled the professor to the ground. His pick shot out of his hand as though snatched by an invisible force. The two beings came over quite close to him, and one of them picked up the tool. Then they made their way back to the disc. After a few minutes the object rose into the air. After a time, it tipped slightly away from its vertical position. Then it suddenly grew smaller, and vanished. Eventually, the professor recovered sufficiently to make his way home. In a footnote Gordon Creighton wrote, "The disc grew smaller before it vanished. One feels there is something of fantastic importance here, a tremendous clue." Captain Howard told me that his gigantic UFO seen over the Atlantic in 1954 seemed to grow smaller while remaining at the same distance from the observers. In the Whidbey Island case of October, 1963, the gray 10-foot-long craft, shaped more like a wing airplane than a disc, suddenly shrank considerably in size, and tilted so that its rear portion dipped into the ground. Professor Johannes' disc was also tipped up in a strange way, and sticking into the rock. For heaven's sake, will all our experts on tempic fields and the plurality of dimensions please put their thinking caps on about these cases? Frankly, I think the granddaddy of all these expansion and contraction cases is the extremely well authenticated one involving aircraft of the Portuguese Air Force. A long account has been given elsewhere, so we will content ourselves with an abridged version to bring out the salient points under consideration. A flight of 4 jet fighter bombers took off from Poer Air Base, Portugal on a routine practice night flight, on September 4, 1957. They were under the command of Captain José Lemos Ferreira. The first part of the flight went as scheduled. Then Captain Ferreira noticed an unusual light above the horizon, and alerted the other pilots. After the UFO underwent various color changes, suddenly, according to Captain Ferreira, the object enlarged, becoming 5 or 6 times its initial size. Before the pilots had time to get over that spectacle, the object shrank, becoming a barely visible, small yellowish point. After about 7 or 8 minutes of these changes in size, the UFO had been gradually getting down below the horizon. Soon afterwards, Captain Ferreira decided to abandon the mission, and head back to base, as nobody was now paying any attention to the exercise. The UFO had now turned bright red. Suddenly, they spotted 4 other objects, which had apparently come out of the mothership. Then wow! The leading UFO dived and then soared up rapidly in their direction. Then, Captain Ferreira reported, everyone went wild and almost broke formation in the process of getting across and ahead of the climbing UFO. As soon as they had crossed over the path of the UFO, the objects began to disappear, and the squadron landed without further incident. The total sighting lasted 40 minutes. At the time, I was editor of Flying Saucer Review. Our Lisbon correspondent was successful in obtaining an interview with Captain Ferreira, at Poer Air Base. The captain's personal account, together with photographs of the 3 sergeant pilots and himself, were published in the review. Quite a scoop really, as this exciting story involved military personnel. It is amazing that this excellent high-caliber sighting is not given a mention in the Condon report. However, from the standpoint of expansion and contraction of objects, you could not have a more perfect example. 12. Animals and UFOs. In this chapter we will consider the effect of UFOs on animals. This was not one of the items listed by Captain Mackay in his Flying Saucer Review article, but we feel it should be included in this section of the book on the paranormal aspect of the UFOs. We have already touched upon animal behavior in the vicinity of UFOs, in an earlier chapter when describing the odd reactions of Mr. Fitzgerald's sheep and Mr. Leslie's steers. The most comprehensive collection of cases in this category has recently appeared in a series of articles called A New FSR Catalog by Gordon Creighton in Flying Saucer Review. The amount of reading and research needed to collect over 200 cases of this nature must have been tremendous. Mr. Creighton has rendered ufology a signal service with this fine piece of work. The catalog starts with an incident from the reign of Alexander the Great, in which 2 strange craft dived repeatedly at his army, causing the elephants and horses to panic. Although many of the cases in the catalog may well have a bearing on the paranormal aspect, some may not do so. Indeed, the writer of the catalog is obviously well aware of this point. In his introduction he states that many of the incidents quoted, involving panic on the part of animals, may be due to some other cause. The panicking of the elephants and horses belonging to Alexander's army was not necessarily caused because the 2 diving craft emanated from an alien dimension. If 2 modern, military jet fighter aircraft were to repeatedly dive over an army containing elephants and horses today, then no doubt a similar stampede among the animals would result. However, when we take all the 200 or so cases listed in the catalog, there is a distinct a priori case for paranormal influences being involved. When modem aircraft pass over fields where cattle and sheep are grazing, there is no particular disturbance. The animals go on nibbling the pasture or continue whatever they were doing, completely unruffled. On the other hand, when UFOs appear in their vicinity, the animals exhibit extreme alarm and fright. It could be argued that the animals are now used to modern aircraft. The point is well taken. However, there are many different types of aircraft in the skies: small private aeroplanes, great airliners, military jet fighters, helicopters, and finally, balloons and gliders. The variety is enormous. Occasionally, new types of aircraft are seen. None of these seem to unduly worry the animals. If the UFOs were simply plainly extraterrestrial, that is, from other planets in our physical universe, then their craft would surely not cause such concern to the animals, who after all, are used to seeing a large variety of aircraft in the skies.